Hi, my name is Therese Stoken. I'm a family physician here in the Port Angeles area. On behalf of two local groups here in Clallam County, CASM, which is Clallam Against Smart Meters and Against 5G, and the Olympic Peninsula Progressives, I am here to introduce you to our guest speaker today on the issue of 5G, Anthony Tony Corrado. Tony has a BS Mechanical Engineering degree from Fairleigh Dickinson University. He has 40 years of management experience with defense-related weapons, sensors, and technology development. He is an inventor who holds 19 non-classified patents. In 2019, Tony gave a number of presentations on the issue of 5G in both Clallam County and Jefferson County. He has written responses to the New York Times articles on the issue of 5G. We feel fortunate to have Tony Corrado here in Clallam County to share his wealth of knowledge and experience with us regarding the very concerning issue of 5G. Thank you for being here with us, Tony.
Hello, and thank you, Dr. Stoken, for that fine introduction. I'm Tony Corrado, and today we're going to be discussing aspects of 5G technology which you may not be aware of. If you're like most Americans, you've heard of 5G from the advertisements that offer you the greatest in speed and information content, and you've heard from the government that all is safe and great technology, but there's a great deal of information which doesn't tend to support that. In fact, a great deal of information that is contradictory to that. And so that's what we're going to present to you today. I suggest that if you're like myself or others, you should do your own research. When you question something you hear, definitely use the Google machine and verify it for yourself. Okay, with that introduction, let me show you the first slide. In slide number 1, you'll recognize the electromagnetic spectrum from either high school, even grade school, or certainly college. But what you need to know is that when we talk 5G, we're not talking about a specific frequency. What I want you to notice on this is that there is a very large portion of this spectrum which is labeled 5G. It is not a single frequency like your phone might use. It is, in fact, the entire electromagnetic spectrum from just below 1 gigahertz to over 300 gigahertz. That is the part of the spectrum that the Federal Communications Commission is licensing for various aspects of 5G that go far beyond telephones or personal communications. It's cars, it's the Internet of all things, it's tracking, it's everything that you may or may not be aware of. So when you hear 5G, the first thing is, think of it as something you don't really know specifically what's being directed at you as a person. I want to talk about what makes 5G different and why you should be concerned about it. Number 1, this millimeter wave part of the spectrum is absorbed by all living things, not just people and animals, plants, insects, virtually everything. Second, and this is something everybody should be concerned about, the FCC rules and interstate commerce rules do not allow individual jurisdictions to opt out of 5G for health and safety reasons. They specifically mandate no opt-out for health and safety. Third, the FCC and the industry are not acting as separate entities. They are working together, and they are mandating not only the use of this technology, but the industry has asked for, and in many cases received, hold harmless agreements so that they are free from liabilities that may result from lawsuits brought by citizens. Even years from now, when damage may be shown to have been caused, that took years to develop. The insurance industry, in some cases, has asked these companies to seek the indemnification because they're not comfortable providing insurance globally for this technology. There are many, many health concerns. They're listed in academic peer-reviewed studies, and I'll go through 6 or 7 of these. but there are literally hundreds, and they go back decades. This industry is deliberately ignoring this wealth of data, but you can find it. The rollout and concerns are absolutely global. This is not a US-only decision. It is going universal with well over 50 to 60,000 satellites designed to cover the entire globe. Finally, it extends far beyond telephones. You may throw away your cell phone. You still will never escape the radiation that's being emitted by these devices. Let's look at something maybe much more familiar to you. This is a picture of your microwave oven, and you might wonder, what does this have to do with this technology? Well, your microwave oven operates in a millimeter wave frequency regime, 2.45 gigahertz. That's the same frequency as your phones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and a myriad of other internet-connected devices. Big difference, and I want you to understand this, your microwave is 1,000 times, in some cases more than that, more powerful than the technology devices we're talking about. But it is also confined. And you notice that your oven is a 6-wall device, always made of metal, because microwaves are always reflected off of metal surfaces. They can't get out, even through those holes in the front door, which vent the air, because they're too small for the microwaves to fit through. But they do leak. But that's not the point. Primary point is you might wonder, why does this slide affect us? First of all, when you put food in your microwave, you never think about the container other than it not being metal, because microwaves penetrate virtually everything: ceramics, glass, plastic, wood, tile, cement. What that really means is that when you're in your home or you're somewhere that's not metallically covered, these waves, 5G radiation, will get through the walls. The other thing you should know is that the microwave works pretty effectively because it heats up water molecules. That's called the thermal effect. And in slide number 4, this is a little bit technical. Don't get scared by it. I want to show you just how effective water and oxygen molecules are to the 5G spectrum. The y-axis is attenuation. Don't let the word scare you. It simply means loss of signal as it travels, as it propagates. The x-axis is frequency, and you'll see from 1 to 1,000 gigahertz of frequency. There's 2 lines on it. A green one, which is the absorption or the loss of signal due to oxygen. The red one is the loss of signal due to water molecules. And you'll see that at various frequencies, that loss gets to be quite high. I've also shown on this graph where the 5G devices fall. To the very extreme and outside of the 1 gigahertz, because it's a little bit less than that, are smart meters at 800 gigahertz. They also have health effects that you should be aware of. The blue area is everything else: your Wi-Fi, your oven, Bluetooth, some cell phones, including 5G cell phones. There's an area in yellow for airport scanners, because when you walk through that scanner, that is a millimeter wave scanner that you're being examined by. Now, that radiation is usually very short duration, so it doesn't pose much of a threat to people. But you should be aware that some people have studied the ability to use airport scanners as you're walking down the terminal itself from 150 feet away. That means you won't be exposed for 1 to 3 seconds. Nobody knows how much exposure you'll have. And by the way, those scanners will also correlate your semi-naked body picture with your facial identification. Think of the information that's available there. You'll see another section for telecom early rollout, but a lot of these are what they call backhaul or other facilities where they're sending aggregated signals from one point to another. But there they are, all in 5G. Automotive sensors, very large area of coming use. The pink area is 5G weapon system. Now they're in a specific area. You'll notice that they are in the low portion of the losses for both water and oxygen molecules. That's because weapons want to go as far as they can with the smallest amount of energy. So that's why they're in that regime. But they are weapons at these frequencies. One last point, that y-axis, it may look pretty benign, but those spacings are not linear. Space number 1 is not 1 or 2 times greater than space number 0. It is in fact 10 times. It's a logarithmic scale. So each division on the y-axis is 10 times greater than the previous one. So what does this mean? Well, I've taken off all the applications here and just picked a few points where you might want to see the effects of this loss of signal. Let's look at the lower bars on the left. The blue corresponds to the water loss, water molecules, the orange to the oxygen molecules, and the red is the addition of both of these because they both absorb energy. And so you can't just look at one and ignore the other. If you go look at the bars on the right, you'll see the red bar is thousands of times greater than the loss at some of these other frequencies because the atmosphere is absorbing so much of that. There's an effect here. You had to generate the power in order that they could transmit this energy, but then as that signal travels through the atmosphere, it's putting energy back into the atmosphere by localized heating of the oxygen and water molecules. Slide number 6 is illustrative of the effects that this absorption by the atmosphere has. You'll see the upper bar showing a distance of, let's say, 100 meters at 2.45 gigahertz, and the lower bar being so much less distance at 40 gigahertz. That loss of signal transmission is due to the absorption of it traveling through the atmosphere. It's enormous. And by the way, this is all things being equal, same antenna, same power level, etc. In slide number 7, we're trying to illustrate the fact that as Wi-Fi and 5G rolls out in your neighborhood, the small cells, as they are called, are going to be placed in close proximity to one another and to your home. And the reason is they have to guarantee you service even in a heavy snowfall. And remember, oxygen and water absorb these signals. So when they guarantee you service, they have to put these cells close together. That means they're going to be transmitting real close to the neighborhood you live in, and the towers with electronically steerable antennas are going to be switching between many of these small cells. Another issue that most people are unaware of is that these 5G signals are going to be provided from satellites. This slide shows you 4 of the companies that are actually have already obtained licenses to launch these 5G satellites. SpaceX, Elon Musk owned, originally got approval for 12,000 satellites. Now they're seeking approval for 42,000. And you can see the other people, you recognize Boeing and OneWeb and Spire Global. There's going to be the entire Earth atmosphere permeated by 5G signals. And the photo to the lower right of this page, this is captured by an amateur in Europe showing 60 satellites at a time and what they look like when they're ejected from a satellite. Now, talk a little bit about why this is happening and why it's not being stopped. Simple. There is no legal path for cities to opt out. Here's a copy of the key paragraph in U.S. Code 253, which states that no local entity may prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the ability of any entity to provide any interstate or interstate telecommunications service, regardless of the reasons. So if you could show them that it could potentially cause serious harm, it doesn't matter. That is not a valid reason for denying a permit. You might think that people are getting upset and there's an opposition to this, and you would certainly be correct. You can see that in the USA, there is not a great deal of opposition, primarily because people don't understand the ramifications, and especially lawmakers, and because it is difficult to prohibit something that is already mandated by law. Senator Blumenthal, Connecticut, has asked for answers, and in a Senate hearing, the wireless carriers conceded that they are not aware of any independent scientific studies concerning the safety of 5G technology. Globally, the resistance is growing and it is more active than it is in the United States. For instance, you'll see on this slide that just recently Switzerland banned 5G until it is demonstrated to be safe. And that's all anybody has been asking for. Do the studies, show us it's safe. Other countries have not banned it yet, but within the countries, cities have put up opposition and are demanding the same thing. And you can read this slide and you can see that it is growing. And there is opposition in the United States. The trouble is, a valid reason for slowing or stopping 5G has not been raised. One that is being considered now is a National Environmental Policy Act, which requires that the environment itself not cause harm to people or, in general, the biosphere. Give you an idea of just how insidious this study actually is, or how insidious the regulations are. This chart shows you the allowable radiation limits, microwatts per square centimeter, that are allowed worldwide. On the left, you'll see the limit is 1,000 microwatts per square centimeter. And 3 countries that have signed up for it, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. The next closest is Israel with 100 microwatts per square centimeter. As you go down this chart, you'll see Austria, and you hardly see a number there because it's so small. It's 1 million times less for indoor effective exposure. Now, Austria is considering, as is the European Union, raising these limits. But this shows you the concern that these countries have taken prior to the 5G rollout. There's another issue I want to make you aware of. Normally, when the carriers, the purveyors of communications test for radiation, what they use is what is known as a carrier signal. It's shown on the top of this picture. It's a steady state, one frequency tone. Trouble is that when they put data on that signal, it doesn't look so clean anymore. It looks like the figure below, which is a frequency modulated signal. Now, these signals in a millimeter wave are billions of cycles per second. Imagine how complex that wave is. And here's what you need to know. Your cell phone and other devices are generally tested to that carrier signal only. They don't put data modulated waveforms in the health and safety studies. And yet it is those waveforms that are the primary cause of the problems, health problems. This slide, will not talk to in detail. You don't need to understand the electromagnetic properties of polarization. It's simply enough to know that not only are these signals varying in frequency, but they vary in the nature of the way the wave travels. In this case, circular polarization means it's simply like a corkscrew as it travels through the atmosphere. Once again, these types of signals are not evaluated for health and safety. Let me talk a little bit about health and safety, and I'm going to cover some of this really superficially, and you should look these papers and research studies up yourself. The first one I want to start with is this article from Henry Lai. He studied microwave radiation from existing cell phones. He did a great deal of work and publications, peer-reviewed, which showed that the DNA in the brain cells of rats was either damaged or broken by exposure to such radiation. This is the existing cell phones. But here's the interesting part. His results and the industry study results are shown because he received a great deal of pushback when he published his findings. And here's what he found. Peer-reviewed academic studies showed harmful effects 70% of the time. Strangely enough, when you looked at the industry paid-for studies, just the opposite. No effect 68% of the time. Once again, do your homework, decide who you're going to believe, the academic research community or the industry. Here's another piece of information that you ought to be aware of. This is an Israeli research from Dr. Ben Ishai, and what he found was that human sweat ducts actually act like helical antennas. They absorb the 5G radiation and they transmit it into the body. This again is not going to be found in any industry studies. Next slide is one that has been published in Microwave News, and it's by Arthur Furstenberg, and you can research his work as well. What he found is something which he called a Brillouin precursor, which says that when you have a data modulated wave, one of those complex waveforms, and it interacts within the human body, either because it's interacting with certain molecules or it's interacting with interference from body tissue, or it's simply being amplified by signals following the initial signal into your body. These precursors, he shows, and in this case, he used simulated brain tissue, and he is claiming that the penetration is 78 times greater than it would normally be. Now, the expert of interest, the global expert, is Dr. Martin Pall. He's a retired professor emeritus, Washington State University, and he has actually published a book which he does not charge for, so you can download it on the internet, search for Dr. Martin Pall's name and 5G, and he lists hundreds of studies related to this field of technology. And he points out a list of peer-reviewed damage to the human body from this radiation. This slide simply shows neurological, neuropsychiatric effects. And if you read some of these, like fatigue, depression, lack of concentration, we can all identify with them. And I'm not here to tell you that all these symptoms, if you have them, are caused by 5G. But he lists these within some of this research to say that in some cases, these are relatable. He has other effects. The endocrine systems are affected by this radiation. They attack the DNA. In some cases, they actually disrupt the single and double-stranded helix within the DNA. And once that happens, the cell is no longer under its own control. It may die, it may replicate in some fashion that's not normal. But DNA is a dramatic impact from these particular frequencies. He also indicates that you can get cell death, programmed cell death happening because of the degenerative actions this technology has on the cells themselves. And I'll talk briefly, try and do him justice, which I cannot do, as to why and how each individual cell is actually affected. Lower male and female fertility, worldwide phenomena. Fertility rates are dropping precipitously worldwide. Are they all directly caused by this technology? We don't know. But somebody should study it before they assume it's safe. Number 7 on this chart talks about excessive intracellular calcium. And this is the mechanism that's been identified as being the cause of so much of these problems. Cancer, well, Cell phone studies have shown this and said this, but they've been mostly ignored or poo-pooed by people and the industry. But over 15 different mechanisms have been identified, and that's a lot. He also has some work, which I'm showing on the next slide, which he references. And what I want to draw your attention to is these are not agencies that have no consequence. Naval Medical Research Institute, for instance, in 1971, talked about apparent neuropsychiatric changes produced by non-thermal exposures. In 1981, a NASA report said there were concerns being raised by various international studies. In 1994, Rome Laboratory of the U.S. Air Force acknowledged the role of non-thermal effects on humans. Again, there's no direct correlation that I can make, but it's clear that there is reason for the government to study this phenomena before they expose people. There's another reason why I think you should be concerned. The human body typically contains 60 to 80 trillion cells, most of which are actively controlled intracellularly for calcium exit and input. These cells are your brain cells. They're your neurons that fire in your brain. They're your blood cells. They are your muscle cells. And these cells depend on a very, very minute electrical charge. I'm showing you on the right what is typical of the cellular control mechanism, the calcium control gate as it's called, on each cell. Notice the upper brownish, pinkish brown line has plus signs and the lower one has minus signs. Those are positive and negative charges. Now imagine they are on the membrane of a cell. You have 80 trillion cells in your body. These are not high voltages. These are minuscule. But look what they do. They control that mechanism. They control that activation gate. When it opens, sodium or calcium ions can go into your cells or out, and when they close, they're controlled properly. When these signals enter the body, this is the mechanism that is disturbed by them. And the academic community has raised this alarm. Government and contractors have not. Two other considerations I'd like you to consider. These effects are believed to be non-reversible. So every day, 24/7, 365, you pick the number of cells that are affected. They're non-reversible. So you're heading towards accumulation of effects. And that is the second part of this slide. These effects are cumulative. They grow over time. Switch gears a little bit. One of the concerns many of us have is on the environment itself, the greater sphere in which we all survive. And this particular slide is representative of the type or depths of penetration, the ease of penetration that insects have to this technology. Remember, their body size, the mass of their tissue compared to their surface area is very, very small. So they absorb these radiation effects much more easily, much more severely. You're seeing in the top of this picture what the thermal effects or penetration effects are at 2 gigahertz, and then at 6, and then at 24 gigahertz for a bee. And as you can see, at 24 gigahertz, that insect is in a world of hurt. It's likely going to die because the radiation has a very severe effect. Another issue that you may want to consider is that as we go to 5G in your personal use, your cell phones, for instance, or the transmission of signals from one point to another, the industry is using steerable, electronically steerable antennas. What this means, because it's a high frequency, they can switch the beam and turn it and transmit it to whatever angle they want, thousands of times per second. That's good in that they can focus the direction of the beam to give you the strongest signal. But if your phone has 12 to 16 of these antennas and they see a signal in a direction on the opposite side of your head, for instance, those antennas are all going to focus their energy to that cell tower on the other side of your head, or wherever it may be. So the amount of radiation, the duration of the radiation, and the placement of that radiation is different than previous technologies. Following slide, I'm trying to illustrate one of the deleterious effects of steerable antennas. In the upper part of that slide, you can see an antenna that is going, let's say, from a tower to another tower. And it's pretty direct, and it's pretty line of sight, and it's probably fairly safe. It can be electronically switched, however, to go to a cell phone. And that's shown in the slightly lower directional arrow. It can also be switched, as in the third directional arrow, to pick up the signal from an electronic meter, let's say at a power transformer located outside of an apartment complex. All of this can happen instantaneously, but when it hits metal, it's reflected. So even though it's aimed at something very specific, like a smart meter on an electrical transformer, it's going to reflect off the housing itself. And who knows what's there? It could be an insect, as I've shown, could be a child, it could be anything. Point is, the control of this signal is no longer predictable. It can go virtually anywhere, and since they bounce off of metal, they can end up virtually anywhere. I want to switch gears slightly to talk about the weaponization of this technology. Now, what's important to realize is the armored vehicle on the right of this slide is shown projecting something. It's called a directed energy weapon. It was developed, I'd like to believe, for crowd control. It uses 94 gigahertz, same frequency that the FCC has allowed for certain indoor communication applications. This information are screen captures off of YouTube. You can search this entire video. I suggest you do it. It's impressive. The distance that it operates in this particular test is indicated as 7 football fields, almost half a mile. And that's what they're willing to tell you about this weapon system. In the actual test, they have test subjects, in this case volunteers. They've also obviously tested it against military. And the maximum time that these volunteers were able to withstand this beam was 4 to 5 seconds. In that time frame, the beam penetrated a few millimeters under the skin, and just like your microwave oven, they felt a great thermal extreme stress. Those people who cannot stand there, they ran to try and escape this beam. Now, if the beam is exposed to people at 4 to 5 seconds, that's one thing. But if people are unable to get away from that beam in 4 to 5 seconds, there's a considerable danger to people. And this weapon is deployed in military service, but it's also being sold for domestic use within the United States. The next slide shows a second or third generation of this weapon, where it's being deployed against flying objects. And technically, what's being shown or desired by this weapon is its ability to destroy airborne threats, such as drones. In the next slide, you'll see a small consumer-type drone, which is used for the demonstration. It is hit by a microwave-directed beam. It is absorbing the energy of that beam. And in the next slide, you're seeing the pieces fall to the ground. Now, this is a small drone, and it might not be alarming, as it wasn't meant to be. But it doesn't matter what size that drone is. If that were a military weapon, possibly even an aircraft, these kind of weapons can take them down. I want to switch gears once again and talk to you about smart vehicles. In this slide, you see a late model vehicle, which could have as many as 9 radars, active radars on it. And they're used for virtually all the good things that you now want in a vehicle. Adaptive cruise control, collision avoidance, blind spot detection, lane change. All of these things are wonderful. They're also emitting 40 gigahertz, thereabouts, plus or minus, radiation. Next slide where I illustrate these vehicles in a typical scenario going down a highway, you can see where all of them are constantly radiating. Again, the safety is hard to deny. But in order to have an autonomous vehicle, which is the goal of every automotive supplier in the country today, you have to have 5G connectivity on all these vehicles. You need these sensors, and every vehicle needs to be able to talk to every other vehicle via 5G. On the side of the road, you need signs, but information in 5G that says, for instance, the exit for SeaTac Airport is coming up in a half a mile. All of those vehicles need that information. And if you happen to be in the furthest most lane to the left and you have to take that exit and your car's on autonomous mode, it has to ask all the other cars to slow down so it can get over to the side of the road. This is an enormous, ubiquitous field of energy that will be on every major roadway in America. There's something else. That same car you buy that you love, and I love mine, you connect your phone to it, 5G. You can use your phone to make a local Wi-Fi network if you want. That same car is communicating anywhere with 5G to anybody who's listening. Could be law enforcement. The controls and communication are two-way. So the lack of privacy is a major concern. It will know where you are at all times with great precision. It could, I say could, be used to automatically, for instance, lock your doors and tell your car to go wherever somebody wants to inspect it or inspect who's occupying it. You have all of this technology in your vehicle, and it's all reflected off of the metal sides and pretty much stays in great proximity to the occupants. What does that mean? Well, in the following slide, I've tried to show what it means. It means the highway ends up being a corridor of smog, RF smog. If you're in that traffic for 6-7 hours, you're exposed to this radiation 6 or 7 hours. Is it harmful? I can't tell you that, but I sure want to know before my granddaughter gets in that car. And the insect and the other animals that will be crossing these highways or trying to live alongside of them, I don't know how they come through this, because they will be more dramatically affected than will humans. So what are we suggesting here? We're raising an alarm. We're saying that we believe we need to get a ban on this technology until it is demonstrated and proven to be safe. We would like to see at very minimum a moratorium on some of the more obvious aspects of the rollout. We're asking that you join us in that and contact all your politicians, your local, county, town, state, and federal politicians, and let them know that you want to have them assure you of the safety. You've already taken another major step. You've gotten some information you may not have had. Pass it on. Make people aware that there is a positive and a potentially very negative side to this new technology thrust. Thank you.